The sun was sinking behind the old refugee camp as the camera lights flickered to life. The air carried the smell of dust and old wood, mixed with the faint scent of cooking fires from the nearby tents. The crew whispered instructions in low voices. This was not a regular film set. It was a real camp where hundreds of survivors lived, and today, for one scene, it had turned into a movie location. Keanu Reeves stood quietly near the tent entrance, dressed in worn army clothes that looked too real. His calm eyes moved across the camp where children peeked curiously from behind broken walls. Beside him, Sandra Bullock sat on a wooden crate, holding a script that she had almost memorized. But today, her hands trembled slightly. This scene was not just acting. It was about pain, loss, and hope. She could already feel the emotion before the camera even started rolling. The director called for silence. Everyone froze. Even the wind seemed to stop. The script called for a farewell between two lovers separated by war. Keanu's character was leaving to protect others, while Sandra's character begged him to stay. It was supposed to be a moment of heartbreak. As the camera began to roll, Keanu spoke softly, his voice filled with emotion. Sandra answered with trembling words. Her eyes filled with real tears as she looked around at the faces of people who had lived through real tragedy. She saw a small boy standing near a tent, watching them silently, his face thin and tired but curious. Something in his eyes pulled her deeper into her role. She forgot the camera and lived the scene. The director was thrilled. Every expression felt real. The extras, who were actual refugees, stood still. Some wiped tears from their eyes. It felt like time had stopped. Then, right in the middle of the emotional silence, a loud, squeaky sound broke the air. It was sharp and funny, like a toy squeezed too hard. The crew froze. Sandra blinked in surprise. Keanu turned his head slightly, still in character, trying to stay focused. The sound came again, and this time it was followed by a small giggle. The director's face turned red. He shouted to cut the scene. The laughter grew louder. Sandra turned toward the sound and saw the same boy laughing uncontrollably. In his tiny hands was a broken rubber grenade from the prop box. He was pressing it repeatedly, making it squeak. Everyone stared. For a few seconds there was confusion. The director walked toward the boy angrily, but Keanu stepped forward and stopped him with a calm gesture. Keanu knelt down and looked at the boy gently. His voice was soft and kind. He asked through the translator, "Why are you laughing, little one?" The boy said something in his local language, still smiling shyly. The translator hesitated and then explained, "He says he thought this war was fake and now he knows no one will die. He thinks that is funny." The set went silent again, but this time it was not the silence of acting. It was the silence of realization. Sandra felt tears rising again, but now they were not part of the scene. They were real, deep, and raw. Keanu smiled softly at the child and handed him a small energy bar from his pocket. The boy laughed again, holding the squeaky grenade close to his chest. The director stood speechless. He wanted perfection, but what he got was something greater. Everyone around started laughing too, not out of disrespect but out of relief. The heaviness of the moment turned light. The extras who had once feared explosions were laughing for the first time in days. Keanu looked at Sandra. Their eyes met, and both began to laugh too. Their serious, emotional scene had turned into a wave of laughter that filled the camp with warmth. When the camera stopped, the director muttered that the take was ruined. But Keanu disagreed. He looked at the crew and said softly, "Maybe this is what people need to see. Maybe laughter in pain is the real story." Later that evening, Sandra sat outside her trailer, still thinking about the boy. She couldn't forget his eyes. There was something innocent but deeply sad in them. She saw him again walking by, holding that broken toy grenade. Every time he pressed it, it made the same funny squeak. And every time he laughed softly, as if that sound protected him from the world. As the sun set, the crew gathered for dinner. Some of the refugees joined. Keanu was sitting with a group of children, teaching them how to fold paper cranes from leftover scripts. Sandra smiled watching him. He wasn't playing a role anymore. He was being himself, gentle, patient, and kind. The boy came near Sandra again and offered her one of the paper cranes Keanu had folded. He said something softly, and the translator smiled. "He says, 'You cried so beautifully today, but please don't cry again. It's not a real war.'" Sandra's heart broke and healed at the same time. She hugged the boy gently. Keanu looked over and smiled quietly. In that moment, both actors knew that this scene, ruined or not, had already become the most meaningful part of the movie. When the night grew quiet, Keanu and Sandra sat beside the campfire with the director. He still looked frustrated about the interrupted take. But Keanu said gently, "Maybe sometimes the best scenes aren't the ones we plan. Sometimes real life writes a better story." The director didn't answer. He looked at the laughing children nearby and slowly nodded. Before going to sleep, Sandra wrote in her notebook, "Today, laughter replaced sorrow. A small squeaky sound broke 1,000 silent hearts." Maybe that's what kindness looks like. What none of them knew was that this laughter would lead to something far bigger, something that would change many lives and reveal a secret of kindness that no one expected. The next morning began with soft light spreading across the camp. The sun touched the tin roofs and torn tents, turning them golden for a short moment. Sandra woke early, unable to forget the sound of the boys' laughter from yesterday. She walked outside with a cup of tea, looking around the quiet camp. Most people were still asleep, but children were already running around, chasing each other through the dusty paths. Somewhere in the distance, she heard the same squeaky sound again. It came from the small boy. He was sitting near the corner of a tent, pressing the broken toy grenade, giggling every time it squeaked. Sandra smiled, walked closer, and sat beside him. He looked up at her with bright eyes full of curiosity. Through the translator, she asked softly, "Why do you like that sound so much?" The boy answered with a shy smile. "Because it means nothing will explode." His words stayed in her heart like an arrow. She looked at the small piece of rubber in his hands. It was old, cracked, and dirty, but to him it was a symbol of safety. She thought about all the people in the camp who had lost everything. For them, laughter was a kind of healing. Keanu joined them a few minutes later, carrying a plate of bread and fruit. He handed the boy some food and said kindly, "Eat slowly, little one." The boy nodded and smiled again. The director arrived soon after, still serious. He reminded everyone that they had to reshoot the same scene today. This time, he wanted no interruptions. He told the crew to collect all props, especially the squeaky grenade. But when a crew member tried to take it from the boy, he began to cry. His tears were small at first, but then grew into deep sobs that echoed through the morning air. Sandra stepped forward and stopped the crew member. "Let him keep it," she said softly. "We can shoot without it," Keanu agreed silently. The director hesitated but finally nodded. The scene began again. Sandra and Keanu stood in the same spot, the wind blowing softly across the dusty ground. The extras gathered again, quiet and still. But this time the emotion felt even stronger. Sandra's voice trembled with truth. Keanu's eyes carried real pain. It was as if yesterday's laughter had washed away the barriers between acting and reality. The camera rolled perfectly. No mistakes. No interruptions. When it ended, everyone clapped quietly. The director smiled for the first time in 2 days. He whispered, "That was perfect." But Sandra didn't smile. She looked at the boy again. He was standing a few feet away, holding his toy close to his chest, watching with serious eyes. Something in his look made her feel that this story was not finished. Later that afternoon, the crew prepared to move to another location. The camp people waved goodbye, but the boy didn't come forward. Sandra searched for him but couldn't find him. Keanu noticed her worried expression. He walked up beside her and asked softly, "Looking for him?" She nodded. "He was here this morning," she said quietly. Keanu smiled a little. "Maybe he went to play. He'll come back." But he didn't. Evening came and the crew packed up. Sandra couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She kept hearing the squeaky sound in her head. At dinner, the director discussed the next scene, but Sandra wasn't listening. Keanu watched her carefully. After dinner, he quietly said, "Let's go look for him, just to be sure." They took a small flashlight and walked toward the tents. The air was cooler now, and the smell of firewood filled the night. They asked a few people if they had seen the boy, but no one had. Finally, an old woman pointed toward a small tent near the camp's edge. Inside, they found the boy asleep beside his mother. His small hand still held the rubber toy. His face looked peaceful. Sandra exhaled in relief. She whispered, "He's fine." As they turned to leave, the mother woke up and smiled weakly. She spoke in a soft voice, and the translator explained, "She says her son hasn't laughed since his father died. Yesterday was the first time she saw him smile again." Sandra felt her throat tighten. Keanu bowed his head slightly and said, "Then the laughter was a gift." The mother nodded and whispered something else. The translator hesitated before saying, "She says the toy was the only thing her husband left behind. He found it after a battle and promised their son that one day it would make him laugh again." The air around them grew still. Sandra and Keanu stood quietly, unsure how to respond. They left the tent in silence, their hearts heavy. When they reached the open field again, Sandra looked at Keanu and said, "This isn't just a movie anymore." Keanu nodded slowly. "It never was," he replied. That night, neither of them could sleep. Keanu sat outside his trailer, staring at the stars, while Sandra wrote in her notebook again. She wrote about the boy, the toy, and how a small, squeaky sound had brought life back to a camp full of sorrow. The next morning, when the crew prepared to leave, Sandra made a decision. She walked up to the director and said quietly, "I'm staying one more day." Keanu looked at her, surprised, and then said calmly, "Me too." The director hesitated but agreed. They had one more day before the next schedule. Sandra and Keanu spent that day with the children. They helped set up small games, distributed food, and even taught them to act out short scenes for fun. The boy with the toy grenade laughed all afternoon. The sound filled the camp like music. As the sun began to set again, Sandra looked at Keanu and said softly, "That laughter, it's what this movie should really be about." Keanu smiled and replied, "Maybe it already is." They didn't know that this small choice, to stay one more day, would soon lead them to something unexpected, something that would reveal how deep kindness could go, and how laughter could hide a truth that would change everything. The next morning began with soft clouds and the quiet hum of voices across the camp. Breakfast fires flickered under metal pots, and children gathered around Sandra, waiting for another round of games. She had barely slept, but her heart felt lighter. Yesterday's laughter had washed away the heavy sadness that had filled the air for so long. Keanu arrived with his camera, taking simple photos of daily life. He wasn't taking them for fame or press. He wanted to capture the spirit of resilience, the smiles that came after pain. When he looked through the lens, he saw people who had nothing but still shared everything. That truth touched him deeply. As he walked past the tents, Keanu saw the boy again, sitting near his mother, repairing the same squeaky toy with a piece of tape. Every time it made a sound, he smiled proudly as if he had fixed the world itself. Keanu crouched beside him and said softly, "That sound is your magic, isn't it?" The boy nodded and replied through the translator, "My father said this toy can protect hearts. When it makes sound, no one will cry." Those words struck something deep inside Keanu. He turned and saw Sandra approaching with small packets of food. She smiled warmly at the boy, handing him a biscuit. The boy offered his toy to her for a moment. Sandra pressed it gently, and the soft squeak echoed in the morning air. The sound made her laugh, and then everyone nearby joined in. It was a fragile kind of happiness, the kind that came from people who had learned to smile through pain. Later that afternoon, while the crew prepared to leave for good, Sandra and Keanu visited the camp director, a quiet man who had been working there for years. They wanted to know more about the families. The man explained that the camp had lost several aid sponsors recently. Food was running low, and some children couldn't go to school anymore. Sandra listened silently. She had acted in many emotional films before, but this time, the tears in her eyes were not from a script. She looked at Keanu, and he already knew what she was thinking. Without words, they shared the same decision. After the meeting, they walked outside together. Sandra said softly, "We can't just leave this place behind. We have to do something." Keanu nodded. "We will, but quietly. No headlines, no cameras." That night, after everyone slept, Keanu made a few calls to his charity foundation. He spoke to his team and arranged an anonymous transfer to a local relief group that supported the camp. He didn't mention his name. He simply said, "It's from two people who saw hope in a smile." Meanwhile, Sandra wrote a message on a small piece of paper and folded it carefully. She placed it inside an envelope addressed to the camp administration. It said only one line: "Please build a small school here, in memory of Laughter." She didn't sign her name either. The next morning, before leaving, they visited the boy and his mother one last time. The woman thanked them for bringing happiness to the camp. She offered them a small cloth bag as a farewell gift. Inside, it was a piece of blue fabric, part of her husband's old uniform with the word peace stitched in their native language. Keanu accepted it respectfully and bowed his head. "Thank you," he said gently. "We will never forget." As their vehicle drove away from the camp, Sandra looked out the window. The boy waved at them, holding the toy grenade high in the air. It squeaked one last time as the car disappeared down the dusty road. But just as they left the village boundary, something strange happened. A group of aid workers stopped their car. They looked surprised and said, "We just received news that the camp will be getting new funding. Someone donated a huge amount overnight." Sandra turned to Keanu with wide eyes. He smiled quietly but didn't speak. The driver asked if they knew anything about it, and Keanu simply replied, "Maybe someone heard that laughter too." The aid worker smiled. Whoever it was, they changed everything. Hours later, when they reached their hotel in the nearby city, the director greeted them with a mix of confusion and excitement. He had received a message from the film producers. The camp scene, the one that was interrupted by the boys' laughter and had gone viral. Someone had leaked a short clip online, and millions of people were sharing it with the caption, "Even in pain, there is laughter." The director was thrilled. The clip showed Keanu and Sandra laughing with the refugees, and viewers around the world were calling it the most honest moment in cinema. Donations were already flooding in for refugee support. Sandra sat in silence, overwhelmed. "We didn't plan this," she whispered. Keanu smiled softly. Sometimes the best things happen by accident. But that night, as Sandra scrolled through her phone, she noticed a message from an unknown number. It contained a photo of the same boy holding the golden toy grenade, standing in front of a tent with a painted sign that read, "Smile School." Below the photo, there was a short note written in broken English. "Thank you for helping. My toy saved the camp." Tears filled her eyes. She turned the phone to Keanu. He looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "No, little one, your kindness saved it." From that day forward, both of them carried that memory quietly. They didn't talk about it in interviews or mention it to reporters. But inside, they both knew they had witnessed something rare. A laugh powerful enough to heal pain, and a child strong enough to remind them what kindness truly means. Yet there was still something they didn't know, something waiting to be discovered. Because behind that one small toy, there was a story that neither of them had heard. And when they finally learned it, the truth would leave them speechless. Days turned into weeks after they left the camp, but the memories stayed alive in both Keanu and Sandra's hearts. Every now and then, Sandra would find herself thinking about the boy's laughter. It echoed in her mind like a small song that refused to fade. Whenever she closed her eyes, she could still see his smile and that small rubber toy shining in his hands. The movie team returned to Hollywood, and life moved quickly again. Interviews, photos, and promotional events filled their days. But something inside them had changed. The glamour of lights and red carpets felt different now. Behind every smiling camera flash, Sandra saw the dusty camp. Behind every microphone, Keanu remembered the child who thought laughter could protect hearts. One evening, while they were reviewing the final cut of the film, the editor paused during the camp scene, the one that had been interrupted by laughter. The audience in the test screening had loved it. They called it the moment where humanity breaks through. Sandra turned to Keanu and said softly, "That child gave us something more powerful than acting." Keanu nodded slowly. "And we still don't even know his full story." After the premiere, they received hundreds of letters from fans. Most were about that one scene, but among them was an envelope with no name, just a simple drawing on the front. A little boy holding a round toy and two adults beside him, smiling. Inside was a small, folded letter written in careful handwriting. "Dear Keanu and Sandra, My name is Arian. I am the boy with the toy. I am going to school now. My mother says you helped us, but I don't know how. She also told me something you don't know. This toy is not just a toy. It has a secret. My father made it from the metal of a bomb that fell near our old home. He told me it used to hurt people, but now it will make them laugh, he said. When I press it, the world will become lighter. Thank you for laughing with me that day. You made his wish come true. Your friend Arian. The letter fell silent after that. Sandra read it twice, her hands shaking. She looked up at Keanu, her eyes wet. He's the son of a man who turned a weapon into laughter, she whispered. Keanu leaned back slowly, his face filled with quiet respect. That boy didn't just save his camp, he said softly. He saved something inside all of us. A few weeks later, both of them decided to visit the camp again without media or cameras. It had been months, but they felt they needed to go back, not for publicity, but for peace. They traveled under simple names, no security, no press. When they arrived, the camp looked different. The dusty roads had small gardens now. Tents had been replaced with wooden shelters, and in the middle stood a bright blue building with a painted sign that said, Smile School. Children ran around playing, their laughter echoing through the air. The camp looked alive again. When Sandra saw the boy, she almost didn't recognize him. He looked healthier, taller, and his smile was brighter than before. He ran up to them holding the same toy, now cleaner, wrapped with a golden ribbon. You came back! He shouted with joy. Sandra knelt down and hugged him tightly. Of course, she whispered. We missed you. The boy laughed and said proudly, Our school opened last week. We learn English, numbers, and how to tell stories. My teacher says laughter makes learning easy. Keanu smiled warmly. Your father would be proud, he said gently. The boy nodded. Mama says he watches the stars and laughs when I laugh. As they walked through the camp, the local volunteers thanked them for their help. But both Keanu and Sandra said the same thing. We didn't do anything alone. That evening, the boy brought them to a small wooden box inside his new classroom. Inside it were small drawings made by the children. Each one showed smiling faces, hearts, and stars. One drawing showed the boy's father standing under the sky with the words written in shaky letters. Laughter can fix what hate breaks. Sandra touched the paper gently, tears filling her eyes. His father was an artist of kindness, she whispered. The boy nodded. He said every person should turn pain into something that helps others. When he found that bomb, he cried for days. Then he made this toy. He said if I can make one person laugh, the bomb will never win. The camp leader told them that this story had inspired others too. People from nearby villages were now creating toys from broken metal, selling them to raise funds for schools. They called them peace toys. Keanu smiled softly. His father created a movement without even knowing it, he said. Sandra looked around the camp, her heart full, and his son carried it forward with a laugh. As they prepared to leave again, the boy handed the toy to Sandra. You keep it, he said quietly. It has done its work here. Now it should make others smile too. Sandra hesitated. Are you sure? The boy nodded. My father said kindness must travel. She held the toy gently, pressing it once. It made that same funny squeak that had once stopped a serious scene, but this time the sound felt sacred. When they said goodbye, Keanu told the boy, You changed the meaning of our movie forever. The boy smiled shyly and replied, No, you helped me believe that laughter is brave. As they drove away once more, the toy sat between them on the seat, glowing in the soft sunlight. Neither of them spoke for a while. Finally, Sandra whispered, Maybe the world doesn't need bigger heroes. Maybe it just needs smaller hearts like his. Keanu nodded quietly. And maybe laughter is the most powerful sound on earth. They didn't know it yet, but the toy's journey was not over. Its final act of kindness was still waiting, and it would reveal something that neither of them could have imagined. Weeks passed after their return home, but the memory of the boy and his golden toy never left them. Sandra kept it safely on her desk beside her favorite books. Whenever life felt heavy, she pressed it once, listening to that soft squeak. It always made her smile. One afternoon, during a live interview about their new movie, the host asked Keanu, "What was the most unforgettable moment on set?" Keanu glanced at Sandra and smiled gently. "A little boy taught us how laughter can rebuild broken hearts," he said. The audience clapped softly, not knowing the full story. Sandra added quietly, "Sometimes the smallest laugh carries the biggest message." After the show, as they were leaving the studio, a young reporter ran up holding a small package. "This just arrived for you," she said. Inside was a photo. The boy standing proudly outside the Smile School, surrounded by children holding new toys shaped like stars and hearts. On the back, written in careful English, were the words, "We made more laughter. The world sounds happy again." Sandra covered her mouth, tears shining in her eyes. Keanu smiled softly and whispered, "The circle is complete." That night, they donated quietly again, this time to build 3 more Smile Schools in different camps. They asked for no credit, only one small condition. Each school must have a room called the Laugh Room. Months later, during a charity event, Sandra brought the golden toy on stage. She pressed it once, and the squeak echoed through the hall. The crowd laughed, not understanding why but feeling the warmth behind it. She smiled and said, "This sound came from a child who turned fear into hope. And that is what kindness sounds like." The audience stood and clapped. Among them, a child's voice shouted, "Make it squeak again!" And she did. Everyone laughed together. Keanu looked at her and said softly, "The serious scene turned funny and stayed kind forever." A year later, the movie won several international awards. Critics called it a masterpiece of humanity and hope. Yet Keanu and Sandra never took credit for the most powerful moment. They knew that the true award belonged to a little boy who believed laughter could stop pain. During a global charity summit in London, both were invited to speak about compassion in art. The hall was filled with leaders, artists, and volunteers from around the world. Keanu stood first, speaking calmly about how cinema should heal, not just entertain. Sandra followed, sharing how one unexpected sound changed everything. As she spoke, she took the golden toy from her bag. She held it up and said softly, "This small toy once stopped an entire film set, but it also started a movement. It reminded us that laughter is not weakness, it is survival." The hall was silent. Then she pressed it once. That same squeaky sound echoed through the vast room. People smiled. Some laughed softly. Others wiped their tears. Keanu stepped forward and said, "A boy once told us his father turned a bomb into a toy so no one would cry again. His laughter rebuilt his camp. His kindness rebuilt our hearts." The crowd stood, clapping with emotion. Cameras flashed, but neither of them cared about the fame. They only cared that the message reached someone who needed hope. After the event, a woman approached them in tears. She introduced herself as a teacher from a conflict zone. She said, "I watched your movie in our school. Our children laugh because of it. We built a small class we call the Laugh Room. It helps them heal." Sandra handed her the golden toy. "Take this," she said gently. "It belongs with children, not with us." The woman hesitated. "But this is your memory," she said softly. Sandra smiled. "It's everyone's memory now." That night, in the quiet of their hotel room, Keanu looked out at the city lights and whispered, "Do you hear it?" Sandra turned to him. "Hear what?" He smiled faintly. "The sound of laughter. Somewhere out there, a child is pressing that toy again." She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. And that's how kindness travels. Quietly, endlessly. Months later, a short video went viral. It showed children in different countries laughing together while holding small, squeaky toys shaped like stars. At the end of the clip, a line appeared on the screen, "Inspired by one laugh that changed the world." Keanu watched it on his phone and said softly, "He did it." The boy's dream came true. Sandra smiled gently. And now his father's laughter lives forever. The final scene of their next charity documentary ended with that same sound, the soft squeak echoing over images of smiling children across the world. No words, no music, just laughter, and as the screen faded to black, the message appeared, turn pain into peace, turn silence into laughter, turn life into kindness. The serious scene had turned funny, and that funny moment had turned the world a little kinder.